In the run-up to that meeting in Brussels, there was a lot of talk about how the future of the EU really was sort of hanging in the balance, was really hinged on that summit. Do you think that was a massive exaggeration, Professor?
It's always an exaggeration because these things always go on far longer than you expect, and then when they do break up, it happens far more rapidly than you anticipate. I think this is really the first time that the European Union has faced a genuine challenge, because in all the previous cases where they took on national governments, particularly, of course, Greece, but also Spain and Portugal, they had nothing like the level of inherent opposition to the European Union program that they now face with the Italian government.
Yeah, and that means that increasingly we're seeing in the European Union, these populist governments are increasingly calling the shots, aren't they? They wield considerable power.
And it's going to continue because, of course, the reason they're wielding power is the European Union has failed to achieve its objectives of growth and prosperity. Let's not forget that one of the titles, I think it's the Maastricht Treaty, is actually called the Growth and Prosperity Pact. Now, if you look at the actual performance of Europe after signing the Maastricht Treaty, it's been growth and prosperity for the north of Europe, but stagnation and poverty for the south of Europe. And that is where the populists are getting their ammunition from. And of course, even inside Germany, there are populists who are campaigning against the fact they're getting such low rates of interest on their deposits, courtesy of maintaining the rock bottom interest rates that have been necessary to hold the European Union together for the last 10 years after the financial crisis.
We hear a lot of talk about reforming the European Union. A lot of it comes from our president here in France. How much of an appetite would you say there actually was genuinely for reform in Brussels? Do you think they are aware of the nature of the degree of anger towards the European Union felt by what would appear to be a growing number of member states, or do you think they're just in denial?
I think they're still in denial, but less so than they were back in the days of Yanis Varoufakis and the Greek situation, because they really browbeat and basically psychologically broke Cyprus in that whole process, and they really thought that was the end of it. Then you saw the developments in Barcelona. Now we have a change in the political scenery in Spain. We've got, of course, a major change in Italy as well. And I think they're realising they're fighting a war on all fronts. And the one thing they're not willing to concede is breaking away from the very austerity-oriented policies that form both the backbone and the weakness of the European Union.
Yeah, and of course, Brexit was very much under discussion there. There seems to be a sort of real sense of weariness about Brexit from pretty much everyone present, including the British delegation. Does that look like it's on track, or are the British heading towards a no-deal scenario, would you say?
Quite possible they'll reach a no deal, but I'm sure there'll be a panic at the end to try to stitch something up. Remember, of course, that the way the European Union was drafted, it was like an Irish marriage before the recent referenda. You could get married. The only way to get divorced was to die. And in that sense, there were no procedures put together to really make Article 50 actually work. And the European Union has been trying literally, quite definitely, to stall the whole process and to make it break down. And the British have completely helped on the other side by being quite inept in how they've handled the entire negotiations. But I think everybody's being exhausted by basically running around putting fingers in dikes, metaphorically, to try to hold the whole ship together. And I don't think it's going to be sustainable in the long term. There's no particular sense of triumphalism to be running the European Union these days.
Yeah, just very briefly, if you will, and to pick you up on that point, it sounds very much as though you are predicting the downfall and the collapse of the European Union. And I'm just wondering, what sort of a time frame would you be talking about?
Well, the first person to call that was actually Wynne Godley, the great English economist, who said in 1992, days after the ink was dry on the Maastricht Treaty, that effectively it was a suicide pact for Europe, and the only way to leave the austerity it would cause would be the migration migration was the only alternative to poverty or starvation, as Godley put it back in 1992. But these things can go on for an extremely long time because there's such a degree of commitment amongst Europeans to the idea of the European Union rather than the actual reality of the European Union. It was supposed to stop war and to stop Europe bickering with itself. It's now causing that bickering. it'll take. It still might take several years, if not a decade, before somebody finally says enough. We're bringing back our national currency. We're breaking out of the straitjacket of the Maastricht Treaty. But I think that's inevitable unless the European Union itself can say we have to break those constraints and let countries run deficits and give up on the obsession of treating the entire economy of Europe like one household, which doesn't even work at a national scale, let alone on international scale, as the European Union attempts to do.